The following encounter happened to me this week. Note, I'm a male in my mid-30s and English is not my first language. I remembered feeling sick in my stomach. Tears ran down my cheeks into my beard. So I was sitting in my car on the side of the highway around midnight in between two major cities in Europe. Maybe less than an hour earlier, I fought bitterly with my girlfriend. We both got mad at each other. She got passive aggressive and I started yelling at her. I couldn't stand to be with her that evening, so I got my keys, slammed the door and drove off to my apartment in another city. I had to take a break during my drive home. The episode with my girlfriend woke emotions that were too great for me to ignore, so I stood there on the highway with my blinking light and no engine on. It was all silence around me, except for the clicking sound of my light and the occasional truck. My body was tight. In my mind, I ran through that escape again and again. I hate when that happens, so I decided to continue driving. I checked around me, then put the key into the ignition, but it wouldn't turn all the way. I was making a face, surprised that I couldn't turn it all the way. I tried again. Nothing. The key was stuck again in the same position. I was stubborn and tried again and again, but failed. Damn it. Thoughts of staying that night on the highway rushed to me. I was annoyed too because I foolishly forgot to grab my cell phone. Now I had no means to contact the emergency services had I needed it, or the fact that I was stuck. Now the clicking of the blinking light was like a constant blow with a sledgehammer to my head. I turned it off. I realised how dark it was around me. Trucks passed me within the following minutes, but I didn't want to step out of my car and wave one of the drivers over. I didn't trust them. Don't ask me why. I always hate when people freeze in the midst of a situation that requires action. So I stepped out of my car. It was slightly raining. Obviously I knew where I was, since I regularly drive there back and forth on that highway. I knew that 2 kilometers ahead of me was a highway exit, so I figured that I would walk on the side of the highway up to that exit. There's a gas station and I hoped the place would still be open. So I closed my car, shut it and began walking on the other side of the guardrail away from the road. So the road was on my left and the trees illuminated by moonlight on my right. Now I've got to be honest with you, I was very scared at this moment. I had no particular reason to be afraid, but my mind turned to the shadows from the trees into men hiding there, watching me with those intense eyes ready to grab me. After about 15 minutes or so, I began to move up a small hill and the rain turned to snow. I then saw an exit off in the distance. I was happy to be close to light, people and a phone I could use. Right before the exit, there was a bridge that went over the highway. When I was about to pass under the bridge, I saw a person jogging on it. I stopped and looked up in surprise. I only made out a silhouette. It was clearly a small woman, ponytail and athletic build crossing the bridge. What woman would want to jog around midnight on a road so close to the highway with a wooded area on both sides? A few seconds later, she was gone. I did try and figure out what she was doing or where she went, but it was too dark for me. I continued walking and passed under the bridge. A couple of meters further down, I took the highway exit. Now, in order to take the exit by foot, I had to jump over the guardrail because there were thick bushes too close to the other side. So basically, I was walking on the road down to the exit to the gas station. On the right side of me, behind the bushes, there was a trail. If you decided to walk up the trail, you'd arrive back at the bridge. So I was walking down the exit slowly, because it's slippery, but also at a steady pace, because I didn't want to get hit by a passing car. Then it happened. Somebody jumped on me from behind and pushed me face first into the ground in the middle of the road. I screamed in terror and turned around, ignoring the pain I was in. The person was already at their feet again. I screamed in shock and surprise. It was a woman in her mid-20s wearing jogging attire. It was the same person I saw minutes earlier on the bridge. She shrieked to me with wide eyes and saliva dripping out of her mouth. She charged again. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my left eye. The woman scratched over my eyes and poked her fingers deep into my left eyeball. I stumbled backwards trying to get away from her, yet she charged at me again. This time I pushed her into the guardrail. The impact was cringeworthy. I broke down in the middle of the road, clutching my left eye. Moments passed and I wasn't attacked again. Against all the pain in my eyes, I looked up and through the tears, I saw the woman heading up the trail towards the bridge again fast. Adrenaline was still running throughout my entire body. The pain felt numb as I rushed down towards the exit, falling on my rear several times during the process. I was panicking like an animal. I just wanted to escape. I reached a gas station, basically jumping against the door to throw myself in. The guy behind the counter was in complete shock when seeing me. Not only was I bleeding a lot, but my eye was swollen shut. The guy called the police and an ambulance. The officers searched the area but didn't find anyone. I'm at home now, in the apartment that I live in alone. I'm still terrified. About 6 years ago, I was with my friend Tom in my parents' cabin. We decided to head off to a casino located on an Obdaway reserve about 40 minutes away. The entire stretch of highway between is heavily forested, and there's no light, meaning it can get incredibly dark. So we get there, played some poker, tried a few table games and grabbed some dinner with our winnings. It was a pretty successful night overall for the both of us. We ended up leaving the casino around 1 AM. A little later than I would have liked, to be honest. We drove about 40 minutes onto the highway without passing any other vehicle. I then noticed 2 green orbs just off the highway before a hill. I realised it was a deer. I slammed onto the brakes and waited. Several deers crossed and we resumed driving. The car was going quite slowly up the hill because of the slope. As soon as we make it to the crest of the hill, Tom screamed, "Oh my God!" And right in front of us was a young woman walking in the middle of the lane towards us, maybe 30 feet away, maybe a bit less. I slam on the brakes again and I come within 10 feet of her. Thankfully, slowing down earlier and climbing the hill meant that we weren't going as fast, but all that was running through my mind was the fact that I nearly ran somebody over. It was this young woman with her pitch black hair, wearing a white nightgown with no shoes, still walking towards us with this blank expression on her face. Not gonna lie, that image frightened me because it looked like something straight out of a horror film. Tom and I waited to see if she was gonna pull up to our window or maybe ask for something. She made it to the front of my car and went around to the driver's side. She didn't stop, but she raised her hand and dragged it across the side of my car while continuing to walk. We were both freaking out. I asked Tom what to do. He thought that we should get out of here for whatever reason. I didn't feel right about leaving and not asking if she was okay. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that she was still walking. Having almost hit her and knowing that something wasn't right, I decided to do something. I told Tom to go and ask if she is right. He pleaded not to, and I ended up going. I acted really brave. I quickly put my blinkers on and stepped out of my car. I left my car open to provide some light and I walked around to the trunk of my car. My interior lights didn't do much. The blinkers barely allowed me to see down the hill. I'm only able to see her every other second. I yelled out, "You alright?" She finally turned around. There was no response. I heard Tom's door open. He was going to join me. She suddenly started screaming. Tom and I ran back to the car and just floored it. I gave a lot of crap for Tom for the remainder of the ride back. We haven't seen or heard anything like that on the highway since, and I'm pretty thankful for it. It was definitely the most creepy moment of my life. This happened to me a few weeks ago. Here's a little backstory. I'm currently in college, about half an hour away from my hometown and parents' home. Every other weekend or so, I drive home to spend time with my parents. I then leave at around 8 or 9 PM on a Sunday and come back to my parents' apartment. By that time, the sun is normally set and it's completely dark out. My parents live in a very rural area of Ohio where there are fields for miles and no traffic or anything. On one particular Sunday, I was driving back to my apartment like normal. It's around 8:30. I'm about 25 minutes into my hourly drive. It's dark out and I haven't seen a single car the whole drive back, so I ended up driving through this tiny town and I only have to stop at one stoplight as I make my way to the interstate. As I reach the edge of this town, it gets more into country roads. Then, a red beat up car cuts me off by pulling out in front of me. Obviously I'm pissed by this. There's no other cars around, this guy could have just waited to pass me. I get over it quickly because my favourite song at the time comes on the radio and I started singing along. I began to notice that the car in front of me is only going about 45 miles per hour. This is a 65 limit. It's a bit ridiculous. I look for ways to pass him, but an intersection is coming up. I decided to wait and see if he goes for a different direction than me. It's a four-way intersection, pitch black with nobody else around. As we come closer to it, the car in front switches on its hazard lights and stops in the middle of the road. I slow down to not hit him. I see the driver's side window roll down and an arm wave at me as if he was calling for help. Now, I'm a very paranoid person, so I refuse to stop and help somebody in the middle of the night that I don't know. I quickly maneuver around the car and make my right turn at the intersection, leaving the car behind. I look in my rearview mirror and see the car switched off its hazards immediately and guns it out of there. Another car comes out of the driveway near the intersection and follows it. Remember, no one else was on that road with us for miles. I can only assume the two cars were working together, trying to lure me in to do God knows what. I'm oddly a target for creepy people. I'm only 4'11" and female, so that may be why. A couple of months ago, I was at a pharmacy filling a prescription. I have a central pain following a stroke I had in my early 20s. I can walk, but the brain damage causes severe burning in my entire body. Due to this, I'm on morphine and have to be seen by a specialist at a well-known hospital. So I dropped off my prescription and waited. I noticed a guy behind me. He's standing way too close. He heard everything I said. I sat down and tested my blood pressure. I noticed him walking around in the aisle by me. I thought he was waiting too. They called my name 20 minutes later. I didn't see him leaving the store. I looked in my car and got in. I locked the doors instantly due to my paranoia of watching scary films, I guess. I stopped at the first stop sign, and out from behind the trees jumps the same guy. In one motion, he was out from behind the tree and was grabbing my passenger side door handle. It was locked. He seemed shocked as I was. He just kept on grabbing it. I was screaming and put on my horn really hard and sped away. Other cars were honking too. I saw him run. I then drove until I saw a cop. He took my info and drove me to the stop sign and asked me to follow. I couldn't see him anywhere. The cop then said to me that it happened a week earlier to an elderly woman, so he needed to find him. I was really lucky, and that's why you should always lock your doors. Several years ago, I just graduated from high school. I spent most of my time just running around with my friends. My good friend Monica had moved to Columbus, Ohio, which was about 3 hours drive from my hometown in eastern Kentucky. Me and my friends Mary and Kraylin decided to visit her late one night. Mary had a 1990 Crown Victoria with a bench seat in the front. It's like a boat. We were all three sitting up in the front, just enjoying ourselves listening to music. About an hour and a half into the drive, we decided to stop at an all-night gas station to get coffee, cigarettes and gas. I got one of those gas station cappuccinos that comes out of the dispenser. We then got back in the car and pulled out of the parking lot. The road that we're travelling on was a 4-lane highway with a grass median divider. So when we pulled out, we had to stop in the middle to wait for traffic to pass. It was a while that we stopped there, and I took my first sip of the vile, disgusting cappuccino. I opened the door and started pouring it out. Suddenly, Colin starts screaming at me to close the door. I look to my right and there's a guy who looks to be in his mid-20s running at me as fast as he can. I slam the door, just as Mary peels off out of traffic, leaving the guy standing there in the middle of the highway. So we're terrified and kept talking about it for several miles up the road. It was probably around 5:30 AM and still dark out, and we noticed headlights coming up behind us fast. We knew it was a guy from the gas station. We tried speeding up, slowing down, but he stayed right on our tail, way into the next town. By this time, the sun was coming up, and we stopped at a red light. This red Chevy S10 pulls up next to us. Sure enough, it was a gas station creeper. He was a rather nice looking guy, looking like he was getting ready for work or something. He was wearing a white button-up, really nice clean-cut shirt, but with a crazy look in his eyes. He suddenly throws open the driver's door, and that shirt was all he was wearing. He ran and tried to get into the truck again at 6 AM in the morning. We totally creeped out beyond measure. We screamed and started driving out of there, terrified. We ran the light to get away. Now, we never saw him again since, but it's just freaky how crazy he was. What really got to me was the fact that he looked perfectly normal when he wanted to, but in the blink of an eye, he could switch on you. So I live in a remote New England street. I just moved here recently from New Mexico. We moved into a gorgeous home about 4 driveways up from a Mormon church. This church has services at random times. I'm agnostic and not really tuned into the schedule they keep. So this one night, tonight, I was driving home from work, listening to a new episode from the True Crime Garage podcast. I didn't want to stop listening, so instead of driving straight home, I slowed my speed so I could finish my episode. I decided to do a slow turn around the church as I listened. Now I'm super paranoid because of all the podcasts I listen to. I had my doors locked. We live in a safe area though, but I wasn't terribly alert. Even through the church it was dark. I couldn't see anybody around. I was cruising around the church lot enjoying my podcast. A man then stepped out of the shadows of the church's dumpster and into the light. He was walking in this very bizarre fashion, kind of like stumbling around a bit. It was the odd manner of his walking that scared me. I floored it. I actually driven off as fast as I possibly could. He launched at my SUV, his fingernails actually scratching at the metal of my back door. I was so freaked out that I drove for a while, not going home, just circling the streets until I finally got there. My husband is out of town because he's training for the military, so it's just me and 2 pit bulls. They make me feel safe, and I have a gun that my husband leaves with me. I called my husband and he reassures me that it's probably a homeless guy and that I need the gun nearby and to go to bed with the dogs. So I do my nightly routine and head towards bed. As I'm falling asleep, my dogs go wild, barking, rushing from window to window. I grab my gun and I just listen to the dogs. I can hear him trying to open the door now. I can hear my dogs going mental. I'm sitting there shaking, not really knowing what to do. I slide off my bed, grab my cell phone and dial 911. After about 30 silent minutes later, a cop pulls into my yard and takes my statement. I am still terrified and shaking. When I went to talk to them at the porch door, I could see footsteps all around my home. I can only imagine it was a guy from the church, but I have no idea how he knew what home was mine. I parked in the garage, so he must have been watching as I come and pulled in, recognising my vehicle. I have no idea how he could have possibly known anything about me to trace me back home though, especially with how quick I drove off. My mum just told me this story yesterday. The relationship to the person is a bit complicated. The guy was my mum's friend's son, if you can follow that. But the point is that it happened close to somebody we know, which makes it all the more scarier. Now, for the sake of this story, I'll say that the boy's name was John. John was driving through Stubbridge, MA, when he got a flat tyre. He pulled over and put on his hazard lights. He pretty quickly got the tyre fixed. By the time he was done, his hazard lights had drained the battery. He was now stuck. A car pulled over behind him and a man offered to help. Neither of them had jumper cables, so there was nothing he could do, yet he wouldn't leave. He simply stuck around and started talking to John, asking him some weird questions. The one John most distinctly remembered was him asking what John's religion was. John started to get some creepy vibes off this guy. He tried to put his car between them. At that point, 2 police cars pulled over behind them. One officer went up behind John and forcefully grabbed him. He told him to get back into his car and do the windows up and lock the doors. It turns out that they had run both license plates. The other man was driving a stolen car. The police grabbed his arm and slammed him against his car, then put him in cuffs. There was an APB out for his arrest. They went around to the back of his car and opened his trunk. What they found in there is truly terrifying. There's a bunch of sharp tools, pickaxes, tape, and some rope. My mum described them as dismemberment tools. It turned out that that guy had murdered 15 people. John was about to be the 16th victim. A few years ago, my friend Jane and I took a trip to Portland, Oregon. We're both from the south side of Chicago, and Jane was feeling pretty jaded with the city. She was convinced that everything was better on the west coast, including the people. So, we flew out to Portland and rented a car. We named it Veronica. The day that we're supposed to fly back, we took Veronica and drove up to Aberdeen, Washington, to see Kurt Cobain's childhood home. After that, we drove down the coast, sightseeing the whole way. We visited Astoria, Oregon to see the house from the Goonies, and ended the day at the Cannon Beach. We wanted to check out the Haystack Rock. All in all, it was a really nice day, to be honest. I definitely enjoyed it. Once it started getting dark, we decided to head back to our hotel, which is just under 2 hours away. I knew that I needed gas. I told Jane that I would stop at the first stop we saw. Cannon Beach is a small resort type town. A lot of shops and restaurants, but I didn't see any gas stations. Being from the city, I'm used to seeing 2 on every corner, so I wasn't really worried. I expected to find one soon. I am completely unfamiliar with the area, so I just kept following the GPS instructions while talking to Jane. Next thing I know, we're not in any type of town. We're on a dark winding road surrounded by trees. At this point, I'm getting worried. I pulled over to the side of the road to use a GPS to search for the nearest gas station. It tells me that there's one about a mile down the road. Awesome. I'll get some gas and we're set. So I'm driving Veronica and it tells us that we've arrived at our destination. I pull into a completely dark and empty gas station. We're still surrounded by woods and darkness. As far as I can tell, there's nothing around for miles. Now at this point in time, and according to Veronica, we have about 10 miles worth of gas and the nearest station is about 30 miles away. Jane and I are sitting there trying to figure out what to do when another car pulls in. I keep going about my business and don't really pay attention to the other car. I just assume that they needed gas too. It's while we're waiting there that, out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody gesturing to me. After some hesitation, I crank the window down to see what they want. There's a middle-aged man and his wife in the car. He starts asking us all kinds of questions. Need to fill up? Coming down the beach? Back to Portland? I kept my answers polite but short. He then tells us that he actually owns a gas station we're at, but doesn't make enough money to keep it open that late. He tells us that he knows of a Chevron about 3 miles away and gives us directions to it. He gave us his number and says to give him a call in case we don't make it to the Chevron. My name is Sam. I'm the mechanic. Let me know if you need help. We thank him profusely and head out. Jane is going on and on about how nice he was and that this would never have happened in Chicago. I agreed. That was very nice, if odd, if strange of him. It's strange that he happened to be driving past his gas station at the exact time that we pulled in. Whatever. I made a joke about calling him Buddy at the gas station too. We make it to the Chevron and this kid, who's 19 years old or so, comes out to pump gas. He asks us what we're doing, then says, "There's a lot of weirdos out here tonight." Jane and I look at each other and let out a small laugh and say, "Ha, I told you." I turn back to the kid and ask what he means. He tells me this story about how his brother owns some drugstore and a ton of money that he's hiding somewhere nearby. He then goes on to say that once he's got on with the shift, he's going to beat the life out of him. I can tell Jane is getting uncomfortable with the bold weirdness of him. We wish him well and start driving. At one point during our conversation, Jane then calls Sam the mechanic man. She leaves him a voicemail. She tells him that we made it to the gas station and how much we appreciate his help. I thought it was unnecessary, but it is what it is. A few minutes later, we're on the highway and about 10 minutes from our hotel. Jane's phone rings and it's Sam. Again, she thanks him profusely. He then starts asking where we're from and where we're going and when we're flying home. He tells her that his name is Sam Jessley and that he wrote a book called Wrongly Accused. We should read it when we're on our plane ride home. Now, this piqued my interest. "Jane, you have to look up the book to see what he's on about," and she Googles it. She then goes limp and looks like she's about to puke. "What is it?" "He was accused of being the Green River Killer." Immediately, she starts freaking out. "He has my number now." Back at the hotel, we do some more digging. So apparently, a victim of the Green River serial killer picked Sam out of a lineup. However, the real killer was caught and convicted based on DNA evidence, but around the same time in the 70s, Sam was convicted and served time for abducting and sexually assaulting young women in the area that we were in. Okay, so this happened to me when I was around 13. My dad lived 12 hours away, so in the summer when visiting, my mum would drive halfway and my dad would meet her in the middle of the drive, then take it from there. At this time, I would just come in home, so my mum was picking me up. By this point in time, we had about 6 hours of driving ahead of us. The sun was pretty low in the sky, so I'm thinking it's around 6 or 7. About 40 minutes into the drive, I remembered looking out of the passenger side window and seeing a car next to us. They're in the slow lane, but keeping right up to pace with my mum's car. The guy inside was a darker skinned man and looked to be in his early 20s. The thing that was really unnerving was the way that he grinned at me. Not a friendly grin, but a maniacal movie serial killer grin. He barely looked to the road and instead was frequently staring at me. I turned to tell my mum about the freak next to us, but I noticed her hands are really tight on the steering wheel and she looked really tense. I'm not sure how long ago she notices him, but it must have been a while before I did. I told her he was freaking me out and she basically said, "Yeah, it's okay." We didn't talk much about what was happening. I think she was trying to consolidate me or something. For over an hour, he followed us on the highway. At one point, there was a lot of traffic, but he wouldn't relent and kept right up with us. He always had this stupid smile on his face. I remembered that I was really worried that he was about to slam into us. Whenever he was behind us, my mum would tell me to look forward and ignore him. The worst though was when he was on my side staring at me. I didn't want him to see me cry or freak out. I just kind of sunk into my seat, hoping that it would stop. My mum switches lanes a lot trying to get away from him, but he just kept on staring and smiling. I was really starting to panic now. I kept thinking, what if he follows us really far and runs us off the road? As we're driving, we see one of them Native American souvenir stores with a calf, slash gas station attached. My mum took the exit at the very last second. I was still freaking out, but my mum took me inside, got us some food, and we sat there and ate for a while. We were facing the window so we could see out, but his car never showed up. After that, my mum took me to the store proportion to look around, I think trying to calm me down. I don't know if she called or talked to anyone. Eventually we left, and I remembered asking my mum what happens if he comes again, and she told me that he wouldn't. We eventually made it home safe and sound. I haven't spoken to her about it since. My dad worked at a beachside bar and grill when I was little. In addition to being a chef, he ran and DJ'd the bike and car shows for the restaurant. The car shows were usually on Wednesdays and the bike nights were on a Friday. The car shows were on a school night, so I was very rarely allowed to go, but my father would often bring me to the bike nights. By all accounts, I was an adorable and pretty mellow kid, and the bikers absolutely loved me. You might say that this was no environment for a little girl, but I learnt a lot about loyalty and friendship from being around the bikers. My dad told me that some of them would call into the restaurant just to ask if I'd be there that week. They'd bring me stuffed animals and candy. My favourite of the bikers was a man that I affectionately called Uncle Teddy. He was a friend of my parents and an absolute mountain of a man. He was 6'8" and 400 pounds easily. He was an ex-marine who loved his Harley and his cigars, and every week for 5 years he would bring me a Butterfinger and a Beanie Baby. I was 6 years old that night it happened, in 2003. My father had brought me to this bike show as he normally did, but I wasn't able to keep my eyes open past 8 PM. The show usually didn't end until 10, so my dad had gotten into the habit of putting an air mattress in the back of the restaurant. He and Teddy would come and check up on me every 15 minutes. I was asleep when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was a man that I'd never seen before. He wasn't dressed in biker gear. He was wearing a short, plaid shirt and jeans and looked really greasy. Not that scary though. He smiled at me and told me that his name was Sean and that he's a friend of my dad's, and that my dad had asked him to drive me home. My parents had tried to ingrain stranger danger into me, and they told me 1,000 times not to talk to anyone that I didn't know. But he knew mine and my dad's name, as well as my nickname. I totally bought it. I immediately stood up, grabbed the flamingo Beanie Baby Uncle Teddy had given me, and started walking towards a parking lot. Sean didn't have a bike. He had a very old 4-door sedan. He opened the back door for me. I climbed inside. You know how in the seniors' home it smells? And they often have plastic wrapped couches or chairs? That's what the back seat was like. It was completely covered in plastic and smelled. At the time I didn't understand why. I think now that it was probably so that there would be no trace of DNA evidence left behind. Now Sean had started to drive away, and to this day, I can't believe how lucky I got. He had parked in the car park behind the restaurant in a way that it wasn't immediately visible to the bike show, but as he pulled away, I saw Teddy heading through the door, presumably to check on me. He just happened to look up at that exact moment, probably acknowledged the car, and I smiled at him. Uncle Teddy didn't waste a moment. He didn't even stop to tell my dad what was going on. He got on his bike and was on that car's ass before he had even knew it. Now the avenue that you had to take to get to the restaurant was long, and about half a mile, and you had to go further down a long road before you made it to the highway. Sean saw Teddy approaching in his rearview mirror and attempted to speed up, but he must have realised this was futile. At this point, he's been spotted, and Teddy would have got his reg plate. Sean stopped the car, turned around, and told me very calmly to get out of the car. I was scared by this point. I didn't waste a moment climbing out and run into Teddy. Sean burnt rubber driving away, and Teddy held me for a moment before putting me back on his bike and taking me back to my dad. By the time we got back, the cops had been called, and they were surrounding the place. A lot of the show had emptied out, and my dad was crying on the sidewalk outside of the restaurant. I'll never forget that moment. I ran up to him, hugged him tightly, and then the rest is a blur. I spoke to the cops. I talked to my dad. I even went down to the station and spoke to a sketch artist. I didn't get home until 2 a.m. Teddy never left my side. The APB was put out on the vehicle, which had been reported as stolen. The sketch circulated around local news stations, but it didn't turn up anything concrete. At this point, I got asked to look at a lineup, but none were him. Fast forward about 8 years, I was 14, and my dad decided I was old enough to know what happened. Sean had actually been spotted lurking around the bike show a few times. He was a customer and a fairly regular attendant. He knew my nickname because he'd been watching me for over a month. He knew my schedule and constantly would monitor me, even how often that Teddy and my dad would check on me. When his evil plan was botched and Teddy brought me back to the show, everybody left. I'd assumed it was because the police had started an investigation, but I was wrong. They all went out to look for Sean. Teddy then given them an exact description of what he looked like and the car he was driving, and the bikers went downtown. I then remembered how that my dad paused for a long time when I asked him what happened. He simply said, "They found him."